Hello, I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and this episode is to offer you what hopefully is a different perspective on how to approach your creativity and your creative ambitions and the projects associated with all that, right? Now, before I get into things, I would like to take the opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So, let's get into this. This is kind of going to be a combination of like a dose of reality, but also still try to keep you inspired and motivated, okay? And in short, I want you to treat your creativity like a startup, right? And the various projects that you work on, think of them, I don't know, kind of like products. It's not a perfect metaphor, but the overarching macro version is your creativity is like your startup. And the way I mean this is that initially, when you're starting off, much like with a startup business, it's going to have to be your side hustle. It just is. We all, much like entrepreneurs, we all wish that our creativity was the thing that basically allowed us to have our lifestyle and maintain our lifestyle, and if not just our lifestyle, but perhaps a little bit more, right? That we could be, making a good living from the creativity that we offer to the world, right? But that's not going to start right away. It's just not, right? You're going to have a job. And that might mean something within the industry, which would be fantastic because then you're still kind of progressing forward in some way. No different than someone at let's say someone who's a coder working for a company, and then on their free time they take all the knowledge that they continue to learn through their job and the experience and so forth, and then apply it to their own side business, right? That would be ideal. Doesn't always happen, right? Not with entrepreneurs and not with creatives, right? What's the cliche? Actors working in bars, right? Or restaurants. Kind of same thing, right? So don't belittle yourself for whatever you have. You got to make it work, right? You have to have that entrepreneurial spirit and really dig in and pay the bills, right? And make a little bit extra so you can fund your side hustle, right? Because speaking from experience and speaking from all the people that I know, when you're starting off, no different than a startup, there's a lot of expenses associated with it, right? And you're not going to make money back initially. You got to put a lot of money into it. Just the nature of the beast, Of course, something like filmmaking tends to be a little bit more higher cost than, let's say, writing a novel or painting or writing a song, perhaps. So there's different costs associated with each thing, but there's a cost associated either way, And part of your role is to figure out, okay, how can I do it for the cheapest amount that that I can work with while still having what's the minimal viable product? That's what they say in startup terms, right? Just to get something out there, or maybe just create a proof of concept, whatever it may be, right? But you gotta start somewhere, and it's gonna take some capital. Now you could be like a startup and perhaps crowdfund, get some investors. Films are costly, and so a lot of filmmakers that I know, they get investors for their film. Now, it's easier said than done, much like with any sort of startup. You would need a pitch deck and, ideally some sort of track record, or at least something, right? So having short films to be able to show them, and so forth, right? Like you have to be able to present to them and get them on board. But these are all the things that you have to do. And these are all the things that you have to do on the side, because none of this stuff is paying you, It's actually just costing you. in that way. But, and I say all this because so many people, sadly, that I talk to, they're like, I'm just tired of my corporate job. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of, working on other people's, stuff and so forth. I want to really work on my own. Like it's my time and so forth. And I say to them, okay, you really got to kind of look at it. Again, I don't mean to discourage in that way. And I'm someone like, listen, I really love taking leaps of faith and so forth, but you also got to be smart about things, like, people will say this, like, what's your runway? People that have quit their jobs to go into, to go full-time into their business, what's their runway? Meaning, how much time do you have to devote to this one specific thing without needing a job? How much money do you have saved up is really what it is asking. Now, sometimes it might not be you specifically. Sometimes you might be married or have somebody else and so forth that might be willing to shoulder that burden while you are off doing this, right? Pursuing this. But that's a conversation you have to have with that other person, right? And they have to be willing and on board, because that's going to be a little bit of a strain, But these are the terms you got to kind of think about, as opposed to, just the reactionary of like, I just want to quit my job and I want to pursue this and so forth, right? To me, that's the speak of the ego that is impatient. And listen, I want you to be incredible. I want it to happen tomorrow. Trust me, I want it for you. I want it for all my friends, and I want it for me. But it's just not, I don't know another way, No one's knocking on my door to make, to give me money to make the movies that I want. Even with my crowdfund currently, it's me having to reach out to all the various contacts that I know and so forth, and really be humble about it and so forth. And I've been very grateful that they have donated, the people that I have. But it's not a given. It's not a guarantee at all. And the ones who can't, especially because of the pandemic, I don't begrudge, I get it. But this is what it takes, No one is requesting me to write the books that I write and so forth. There's a value to it for people and things like that, but I'm not being paid in that way to put out this episode or the other episodes and so forth. And put them out, like this specifically because it means something to me, and good things have come out of it, both in terms of the benefit for audiences. Also, some other people see it, and that's how I get certain coaching jobs or referred to for other big jobs. And so it pays in other ways, right? And you kind of got to see it in that way. So before you quit everything, really consider what is your runway on things. And you got to have that patience, like our career, I've talked about this in the past, but I want to reiterate it. This idea that, it really is a journey, and like where you're at, like stop trying to skip these steps, because these steps, where you're at right now in the process, is meant to teach you something. And you're supposed to go through this, because by skipping that step, you won't know all the things that go into it. Every time I shoot a film, whether it's a feature film or a short film, I learn something that helps me out on the next project, that allows me to then escalate and elevate the things that I work on, and I'm grateful for that, and I wouldn't replace that. So you gotta really think in those terms. And the other thing, like if you're gonna do this, speaking of finances, you also you gotta have some runway money if you're gonna really go all in on this. But the other side, even as part of your side hustle, you gotta understand, some things financially will have to where are you prioritizing? Of course, you gotta have rent, you gotta have food, but you have to eat out at restaurants versus okay, can you really go to a grocery store and cook for yourself and save money that way? What and it's that traditional thing of like, stop buying your coffee each and every day and instead make your coffee and things like that. Like what are all the ways that you can save your money that you can then put into your creative projects, your side hustle? These are the things you got to consider in that way. And, as part of all this, a lot of us have multiple ambitions. There's someone I know that has music and has a podcast, and they're like, I want this podcast to be as big as possible, and it's like, I want that for you too. But in some sense, I think the mistake that I hear when I hear this person talking about it is that the podcast almost seems separate of the music, and it's like they work in tandem. You've got a great audience already, and continue building on that. Like it's just, again, that patience thing. It's just not going to happen overnight. And I'm not taking away from you. A lot of people will tell me like, I'm tired of apologizing for wanting more. It's like, don't apologize to me for wanting more, but you gotta have patience. You do, and that's very humbling. It sucks, but that's the nature of the beast. But in that same way, while all this focus goes into, I gotta grow this thing, it's like, the music is blowing up and things like that, and they work in tandem. You become a better, like, it's like I often see now, especially, a lot of celebrities enter the podcast space, and then, their podcasts will generally do very well, right? Maybe not as much as they were expecting, but certainly, by the definition of what makes a successful podcast in overall, And it's like, well, because they were already famous. So to me, it's like, okay, your music's already like that's already going in a great way. So guess what? That's only going to eventually fuel the podcast, and vice versa. Stop seeing them as separate things, and just have that humility. And this is just one of many examples in these various arenas. But yeah, I never, in this way, I never look at what I do with the lessons here as separate of the other stuff, because, it all fuels it in the end. By doing these lessons, I get my thoughts out and I get sort of feedback from you, and it helps me to create connections I otherwise wouldn't have had. And then I get to make, the films or other stuff that I get to make. And then that experience and then allows me to bring it here and be like, here's kind of deduced, what I learned from that experience and how it may help you. So it all works in that way. And in that way, Stephen Pressfield, this is one of the big things that's like hard to swallow, but Stephen Pressfield writes about it in War of Art, that you are entitled to the labor, but not the fruits of your labor. It's like with a startup, you don't know what's going to happen. It is a leap of faith. And so, you can go ahead and do it and things like that, but you're not guaranteed success. In fact, there was a great speech that I heard recently. ESPN posted it on Instagram, and I apologize because I don't know who exactly it was. It's just kind of coming to my mind, but it was, I want to say Ohio, or maybe Iowa, one of the football strength trainers. He was giving this speech, and he talked about how winning owes you nothing. Someone might work less than you, and they might win. You might work your ass off and still not win. He said a lot more, like he gives this really incredible, like almost a minute kind of speech about how winning it's not fair. It doesn't owe you anything in that way. But, without sprinting into the unknown, you're never going to win. You're not guaranteed to win, but you are guaranteed to lose if you don't move forward. Point blank. And that might seem like it sucks, but that's the nature of the beast. And, these are all the things that we have to kind of accept, no different than an entrepreneur, and listen, there's something to be learned from failure. There really is. And I know it's cliche and things like that, but, and it's something that you have to grapple with and have humility for, that you might fail, but even in that failure, there might be something good that comes across it. And you have to see it. Like, there's, on a recent episode of, A Bit of Optimism with Simon Sinek, one of the guests that he had talked about this idea that he was a perennial failure. And by the way, I'll link to the episode in the description. But he failed at a bunch of things, right? In fact, so much so, like, he was invited twice to be a keynote speaker at FailCon, which is all about failure. So it felt like a kick in the nuts. But really, there was one point where he was listening to a speech at a different type of conference, and the person speaking was, they had a successful medical startup, and they were saying how, when they were starting off, they really studied this person's company, not for necessarily competition, but as inspiration and so forth. And it led to this really great thing. And that takes a lot of humility to, be like, oh, wow, we went out of business, but we inspired this company, and that company is doing some really good stuff for all of humanity. And that's a real victory, and that's success. Talk about, like, you are entitled to the work, but not the fruits of your labor. And I understand that type of thinking it's hard. It's hard for a lot of, it takes humility, it takes letting the ego aside and things like that. But when you can do that, your victories come in some other fashion. And I'm not just talking about that sort of thing where then other people take and run with, kind of what you set out to build. Eventually your time will come in some way, shape, or form, which I know might seem contradictory to what I was talking about in terms of winning owes you nothing. But I just believe if you just keep a good spirit, eventually something hits in the world. Just like with startups, it might not be the initial startup thing. It might not be the second or the third, but eventually something will hit. And, it's not going to come when you want it. That's just it. Trust me, because I'm sure you would have wanted it yesterday, no different than me and all my friends, but it can happen. And you got to just accept that journey. I know you don't want to, but you got to, and just go with it, because there are lessons along the way, and you will look back on that time and you will regret not having been more present and enjoying them when you were. I would love to be, on the level of that Robert Rodriguez is today. But I also know his journey to get there. I often, and this is something that I, talk to a lot of people about, I try to get them to identify who is their hero, Beyonce, Ryan Seacrest, whoever. It's like, okay, now study their trajectory. What are the lessons you can take? Because you're looking at the person as they are today. But go back to their beginning, and study their beginning and like literally, as microscopic as you can, so you can start to see the things that they had to do, and then do that. You got to take those steps. When I made my first movie, I literally studied all my favorite directors' first films. And I set out to replicate that, as much as I could. And not like, in a derivative way, but in my own, like, hey, this is still a Phil Svitek movie. I'm not just copying somebody else, right? But in terms of, their approach, how, the finances that they put into all that stuff, I tried to mimic that as much as I could, and learn from it. And obviously, it's been, the business changes and so forth in that way. And in many ways, my life was made easier because of digital cameras and so forth, stuff that they didn't have, a lot of them, when they were first starting off. But, that was great because that's only to my advantage rather than a detriment. So all these things you have to keep in mind, and you really have to see your creativity as a startup and approach it in that way. Entrepreneurship and being a content creator are not that different. And, I'm sorry to say that to want to make it happen tomorrow and just quit your job, like, that's irresponsible. And that's your ego talking. It's not going to be that way. You have to keep working at it, And yeah, this might not be the inspiring episode that you wished it would be, but it's a dose of reality. And in spite of all that, I say keep going, because guess what? Again, no one's knocking on my door. I try to walk the talk, and in that way, as much as I can, I have been with the things that I do. And who knows? I don't know the outcome of all this. It was we were talking about my second movie, and I let slip to some people I know. I was like, yeah, I want to submit it to the Cannes Film Festival and so forth. And they were like, oh, you think it'll get in? I said, no, that's not my goal. It just gives me a deadline to aim for, and the submission is the goal. Whether or not I get in is beyond my control. But if meeting the deadline and being able to submit, that's within my control. So focus on what you can control. Anyway, thank you so much. Please take this all to heart in the spirit of which it is intended, which is to give you the tools to properly go about your creativity and to be able to do it, in that way. But as always, if you have any questions, please ask away down in the comment section or hit me up on social media at Svitek. Would love to converse with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and hope to see you next time.